Hi, I'm Venitra. My family didn't just take my house, they erased me from it. They told everyone it was theirs, gave it to my brother, and when I didn't agree to disappear quietly, they changed the locks. Now, they're standing at my door with nothing left, asking me for help. But where were they when I slept in my car? When they told the courts I was unstable? When they used my silence to build their lie? What would you do if the people who raised you rewrote you right out of the story? Would you open the door? Or finally close it, for good? I got the invite 3 days before the party. Not an actual invitation, of course. Just a group text that read, "Family cookout this Saturday for Delmar's birthday. Bring sides." That was it. No, "Hi, Venitra." No, "Hope you can come." Just an obligation disguised as an invitation. Still, I went. I parked down the street, like I always did now. Something about pulling into the driveway of the house I paid for, but no longer lived in, felt like asking for permission I knew wouldn't be granted. The front lawn looked nice, new landscaping with mulch I didn't recognize. Someone had trimmed the hedges. I hadn't been there in nearly 6 months. Inside, the same smell, lemon pine sol and Charlene's pot roast. It made my stomach turn, not because I hated it, but because it reminded me of years I spent trying to belong in a home that never made room for me. On the folding table near the entryway, a sign said family name tags. I scanned the labels. Charlene? Marvin? Delmar? Trinell? Even the kids had their own. Mine said, guest of family. I peeled it off the backing and stuck it on my shirt like it didn't bother me. Charlene was in the kitchen, laughing. Delmar just got promoted again. Regional now. Isn't that something? I stepped in to say hi. Oh, hi, baby, she said flatly, like I'd interrupted something sacred. Did you bring potato salad? No, I said. I wasn't assigned anything. Well, there's plenty. She turned back to the pot on the stove. That was it. I found a spot near the back porch where no one was talking much. Just me and the kids, who were too busy with phones to notice anyone else. At one point, Trinell handed me a juice box and said, "Can you give this to Lily? She still gets shy around people she doesn't know." I almost laughed. People she doesn't know, she said. I'd helped change Lily's diapers. But sure, go ahead and erase me in real time. Dinner was announced with Marvin tapping a spoon to a solo cup. Let's give thanks for being together, he started. And to Delmar, our rock, our provider, our next chapter. He looked at his son like he was handing him the crown to a very small, very cheap kingdom. Charlene stepped in. We also wanted to share something special. Delmar and Trinell have been such a blessing to this home. They've made it a real place for their family. So, Marvin and I have decided to transfer the house into their name permanently. Applause, smiles. Trinell looked shocked, but not surprised. I sat completely still. No one looked at me, not even Delmar. I didn't say a word. What could I have said that would have changed anything? They'd taken what was mine and gave it to the one they'd always chosen. I was just a name left off the deed, and now, apparently, off the guest list too. I stood up. No one noticed. Out on the front porch, I leaned against the railing, watching cars cruise by in the humid evening air. Across the street, old Mrs. Mendez walked her dog. She waved politely and asked, "You visiting family?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." She nodded, kept walking. Even the neighbors didn't know it was my house, my investment, my foundation. I listened to the laughter echoing inside and felt like an uninvited ghost. I had spent years helping keep that roof over our heads, and now I wasn't even allowed in the photograph of the memory. Later, in my car, I finally looked at the envelope from the group text that Trinell had printed for those who don't check their phones. It was addressed to Vanetta. I stared at the name. Vanetta. Not even close. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, trying not to let it feel like a funeral. Not for the house, not for the family, but for the version of me they never let exist. They never called her by her name. They never believed she built anything, and they never expected her to come back with receipts. That night, I tossed in the back seat of my car for hours. The AC had long given up fighting the Texas heat, and the faint glow of the corner laundromat flickered like it was breathing. I stared up at the car's ceiling and tried to pinpoint when exactly I'd become the guest in a house I built. My mind drifted back 5 years, to a day that should have felt like victory. I had just closed on the house, my house, after landing a major freelance contract that paid more than I'd made in the last 2 years combined. I was proud, not just for the money, but because I did it alone. Charlene didn't congratulate me. She frowned and said, "You're too young to be signing property papers without a man's name on it. What if someone takes advantage of you?" I remember blinking. "What kind of man would take my house?" She shrugged. "You'd be surprised." The pressure wasn't loud or aggressive. It never was. She couched it in concern, layered in those just looking out for you phrases Southern mothers are so good at. "You know how people talk in this neighborhood, V? A single woman on a deed? That just screams messy." Marvin stayed quiet. He always did. Eventually, I caved. I agreed to put the house in my father's name, temporarily. Just until I was settled. I told myself it wasn't giving up control, it was choosing peace. And peace, at the time, felt like something I could buy with a signature. A week later, I forwarded the final paperwork from the title company to Charlene's email. She never replied. Months passed. I brought it up once over dinner, when she asked how I liked the kitchen upgrades. I said, "It still feels strange not having my name on the documents." She didn't miss a beat. "Delmar had a great interview this week. If he lands this one, he'll be back on track." Back on track from what? I didn't know. Delmar always found ways to start over without finishing anything. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. The house became busier. Trinell moved in with the kids after they lost their lease. I didn't argue. "Family helps family," Charlene said. That was her mantra. By summer 2020, the master bedroom was handed over to Delmar. Charlene said it was best for the children's routine. I was offered the guest room, then the basement. Then, nothing. When online school started for the girls, Trinell claimed the guest room for remote learning space. I came home from work one evening and found my boxes in the hallway. "We didn't know where you'd want them," she said flatly, holding a juice box like she was in the middle of babysitting. I started sleeping in my car, first in the driveway, then in the laundromat parking lot 2 blocks away. I'd shower at the gym, use the restroom at work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was less humiliating than being ignored in my own home. I never told anyone, because no one ever asked. That was the rhythm of it. Charlene and Marvin called every now and then to ask if I could grab milk on the way home, or if I'd take the kids to school since I was already up. But they never asked where I was sleeping, never asked why my car had a pillow in the back seat. They didn't want to know. And I didn't give them the satisfaction of saying it out loud. What struck me, even then, was how seamless it all felt. As if I was the one fading out. As if my absence made everything easier. No conflict, no noise, just the slow erasure of my presence, like pencil lines being gently rubbed away. There were rules in that house, not posted on the fridge, not spoken directly, but deeply understood. Don't challenge your mother in front of company. Don't make Marvin choose between you and Delmar. Don't inconvenience Trinell. She's got a lot on her plate. Don't talk about what you've done. It's not humble. Don't remind them whose name should have been on the papers. Don't expect applause, especially not when you're not the favorite. I followed those rules like scripture. Until the day I didn't. Until the day I asked for space. For clarity, for basic acknowledgement. And that's when they stopped even pretending. I think the part that stung the most wasn't that they gave Delmar the house. It's that they always knew they would. I was never in the running. I was just a placeholder, someone to keep the lights on until the real owners arrived. Back in the present, I sat up in my car, stretched, and looked at my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I opened my email, typed in the county clerk's website, and clicked Start New Filing. They could ignore me. They could rewrite the story. But they couldn't erase the paper trail. By the time I submitted the first round of paperwork to the county clerk, the sun was beginning to set. I remember sitting there in my parked car, just outside the public library's Wi-Fi zone, watching as the horizon dulled into a dusty pink. I wasn't sure what felt heavier, the digital confirmation email on my screen, or the silence that followed. Not a single message. Not even a, "Where are you?" from Charlene. I didn't go back to the house that night, not because I couldn't. I still had my key, but I didn't want to walk into that kitchen and act like anything was normal. There wasn't a room in that house I could enter without being reminded I was a problem to be solved. And when a family sees you that way, you start solving yourself right out of the picture. It didn't come as a demand, not at first. That's not how Charlene worked. She liked to make things sound like choices you were already leaning toward. One evening after dinner, she glanced up from her crossword and said, "Have you thought about staying with Aunt Rhea for a while? Just to give the kids some space. Trinell says Lily's been waking up more at night." I remember blinking. "You want me to move out?" She set the pencil down calmly. "I didn't say that. I just think it might be good for everyone to breathe. You know how tight the house feels lately." She smiled like she was offering me a spa retreat. The way she worded things made it hard to argue. And if you did, you were overreacting or too sensitive. A few days later, I came home from work to find my laundry in a grocery bag on the floor. Trinell was standing in the hallway, scrolling through her phone. "Didn't know where you wanted it," she said. "We needed the dresser space for school supplies." Then she turned to her kids and said, "Hey, y'all, remember, Miss V's room is off limits. She won't be staying with us much longer." Miss V. Like I was a guest teacher who'd overstayed my welcome. I didn't say anything, not because I agreed, but because I knew it wouldn't change a thing. It's strange how children can be taught to fear you without a single lie. Just tone, just side eyes and hushed conversations. Delmar's oldest, Macy, started avoiding me altogether. The little one, Lily, would inch away if I sat next to her. I overheard Trinell whisper to her once, "She's not bad, sweetie. She's just not like us." Not like us. I replayed that line over and over. I wanted to ask, in what way? But I already knew the answer. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. I didn't defer. I wasn't soft-spoken and agreeable. I worked too much. I talked too little. I stayed late. I said no. They didn't know how to name those things without making them wrong, so they made me wrong. I started waking up earlier, leaving the house before the kids were up. I worked longer hours. I told Charlene I had client calls at night, so I didn't need dinner. Sometimes I parked near the grocery store and just sat with a sandwich in my car, watching families load their trunks with the week's meals. Eventually, I stopped coming home at all. I found an overnight gym that let me shower. I kept a duffel bag with me and charged my phone in the car using a power bank. On weekends, I'd find shaded parking lots and try to sleep with one eye open. It wasn't sustainable, but it was quieter than pretending to be part of a family that barely acknowledged I existed. A week after I stopped showing up, I came back one night just to grab some winter clothes. The lights were off. I still had my key, but when I turned it in the lock, it didn't fit. At first, I thought I was just tired. I tried again. Slowly, deliberately. The key wouldn't turn. They'd changed the locks. No warning, no call, no explanation. I stood there, in front of the door I helped pay for, listening to the muffled buzz of the fridge inside, the sound of a life I'd been edited out of. I walked around the side of the house, tried the garage. Also locked. No note. No bag left outside. Just a silent confirmation that I'd been dismissed without ceremony. The next morning, I went back and left a sticky note on the mailbox. I didn't expect anyone to read it. I just needed it to be said, somewhere, out loud. "I'll be out of the way. I always was." No one replied. No one asked where I'd gone. The morning after I left that sticky note, I parked across from the county clerk's office and stared at the building like it owed me something. Maybe it did. Or maybe I just needed it to be the one place in town where I still existed on paper. I had a folder in the passenger seat, thick with receipts, printouts, timestamps, emails, contractor quotes, all in my name. I'd spent the better part of 2 weeks pulling it together at night from my car, with a borrowed portable hotspot and public Wi-Fi. The printer at OfficeMax had jammed 3 times, but by the end, I had enough to show a judge I wasn't just squatting in a story someone else wrote. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't looking to burn the house down, at least not literally. I just wanted my name put back where it belonged, on the title. The lady behind the filing counter didn't flinch when she asked, "Filing Pro SC or do you have representation?" "Pro C," I said, and she nodded like she'd seen it 100 times that week. She probably had. People lose things quietly every day in places like this. I wasn't special. Still, I left that office feeling taller. Maybe because it was the first decision I'd made in months that hadn't been for someone else's comfort. The paperwork was stamped and scanned. I had a case number now. I had leverage. For once, I wasn't asking anyone to believe me. I had proof. Weeks passed with no response, until one arrived in a standard white envelope, stamped and sealed, marked opposition response. Inside was a typed statement and legal summary from the defense. And at the bottom, a signature, Devereux Hall. My breath caught. I hadn't said that name out loud in years. We'd met back in undergrad, debate team. He was whip-smart, always composed. We never dated, not really, but we danced around it. Shared late-night study sessions, called each other just to talk, drifted into long silences that always hinted at something more. I had liked him, genuinely, and now? He was their attorney, their legal shield, their mouthpiece. I stared at the signature for longer than I care to admit. Then I snapped a photo of it and sent it to an old friend with a single line. "Guess I'm the villain in their version of the story." To be honest, I didn't know what hurt more, that he was defending them, or that he hadn't even warned me. Our hearing date was set. I prepared like it was a full-time job. I practiced my statements, highlighted the documents, reprinted copies. I even color-coded the binder. I told myself it was about being organized, but really, I needed to feel competent again. I needed some kind of order after months of being erased. The morning of the hearing, I got there 15 minutes early. The courtroom was cold, the fluorescent lighting harsh against the wooden benches. I sat in the second row, behind the plaintiff's table, flipping through my tabs as if anyone else in the room was watching. He walked in 3 minutes before the judge. Same calm stride, same pressed collar, same way he carried a conversation with just his presence. He saw me and looked away. I didn't wave, I didn't smile. I just sat still. He didn't approach. No nod, no gesture, nothing. This wasn't college. This wasn't flirting in libraries or quoting case law over late-night coffee. This was real. This was my home on the line. This was them calling me a squatter in the house I bought. The judge asked if I had representation. I stood. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed too much for that. Devereux presented the motion to dismiss. It was standard stuff. Claims of miscommunication. No clear proof of financial contribution. The assertion that I'd voluntarily vacated the property. I handed the judge copies of my bank transfers. The inspection report in my name. The initial down payment sent from my account. The email chain with the realtor. The original loan approval, before Charlene convinced me to use Marvin's name for now. The judge reviewed it carefully. Silent. Devereux didn't object. He didn't argue much. Maybe because the evidence spoke louder than he could. Maybe because he knew me well enough to recognize I wouldn't have shown up unless I had the receipts. After the hearing, I stepped into the hallway. My body finally let go of the tension it had been holding for hours. I leaned against the wall, taking in deep breaths like I'd just finished a long run. Devereux came out minutes later. He glanced at me, nodded politely, and kept walking. I didn't stop him. We weren't those people anymore. And I wasn't there to reconnect. I was there to win. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like paper and carpet glue, familiar in a way that didn't comfort. I stood there, binder still in hand, heart not racing anymore, but not entirely steady either. I knew what I'd brought to the table. I knew the numbers matched, but I also knew my last name didn't carry the weight theirs did in that town. 2 weeks passed before the next hearing was scheduled. I filled the time with more paperwork, cross-referencing dates, copying statements, checking timestamps until my eyes blurred. Every night, I reviewed the facts like scripture. Not because I thought the truth would be enough, but because I had nothing else to rely on. When the date finally arrived, I wore the same blazer as last time. It wasn't about style. It was about control. A small routine in a storm of variables. The courtroom looked the same. So did Charlene, perched beside Delmar, like she was attending a family brunch rather than a legal proceeding. Trinell was behind them, her phone in her hand, tapping the screen like her attention was too expensive for any of this. The bailiff called us in. I stood, steady. Devereaux didn't greet me. He looked down at his notes as if I were another appointment on his calendar. That was fine. I wasn't here for pleasantries. The judge entered, glasses low on her nose, tone clipped and businesslike. We'll be reviewing supplemental documentation from the plaintiff today. I nodded, stepped forward, and handed over a small stack. These are digital receipts from the initial wire transfer, Your Honor, including the purchase deposit, loan inspection fee, and title insurance, all paid from my account. You'll also find the email thread with the original realtor, confirming my approval and communication history. She took them, flipping through each page with methodical precision. Her brow didn't move, but her focus deepened. "And the scanned deed submitted by the defense?" she asked. Devereaux passed it over. She placed both documents side by side. Then, slowly, she turned to me. "Miss Venetra." "Yes, Miss Venetra. Are you stating this signature isn't yours?" "It is not." She nodded again. "Any indication of forgery?" "There are inconsistencies in the alignment. Also, the spacing in the last name. Mine is usually tight. This one stretches unnaturally. The date doesn't match the bank transaction. And this version doesn't match my verified e-signature on the lender's portal." It was the most technical I had sounded in months. And for once, I didn't shrink from it. Silence settled in the courtroom, the kind that stretches a little too long, like everyone's holding a breath they don't know they took. Then a voice from the gallery cut through. Excuse me, Your Honor." Everyone turned. Even the judge paused. There, standing near the back pew, was Mrs. Ebba. Gray curls pinned back, clutching her large brown purse with both hands, spine straight, despite the tremor in her voice. "I'm sorry to speak out like this, but I've lived across the street for 17 years. I watched this young woman paint that porch herself. I watched her carry in every box when she moved in, and I watched her sleep in her car after they changed the locks." Gasps rippled. Not dramatic, but enough. Charlene didn't turn. Delmar looked down. Mrs. Ebba took a breath and added, "I told them it wasn't right. I told them. But they said it was family business, and that I should mind mine." The judge raised her hand gently. "Ma'am, I appreciate your input. We'll take your statement under advisement." Ebba nodded, sat back down, and didn't speak again, but her words hovered like incense. The rest of the hearing was procedural. Devereaux tried to regain footing, but it didn't land the same. The judge requested time to review all new submissions. No ruling yet. But I didn't need one. The air had changed. As we filed out, I didn't look at Charlene or Delmar. I didn't need to. For the first time, they weren't looking at me either. Not in that smug, dismissive way. Not like they held the upper hand. Outside, I didn't celebrate. There were no fist pumps or deep exhales. But something shifted. The lie had cracked. The silence had been broken by someone who had nothing to gain and no reason to stand with me, except that she knew the truth. It wasn't just a small win. It was a correction, a rearranging of balance that had been tilted too long. I didn't need the judge's gavel that day to feel the scales start tipping back toward me. After the hearing, I kept my head down. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even decompressing. Something in me knew they weren't finished. Not because they had more to say, but because they'd lost control. And people like Charlene don't sit quietly after losing control. 7 days later, I got a packet in the mail. Legal letterhead. Inside was a new affidavit submitted by my own mother, claiming I had a pattern of emotional instability. It referenced vague therapy sessions, concerns for the children's safety, and my alleged erratic behavior during the time I lived at the house. Buried in the attached statements was Delmar's note. She once locked herself in the garage screaming for hours. I hadn't. What happened that day was simple. I had just gotten off a client call, was heading into the house, and realized they had thrown out my work notebooks, boxes I kept stacked neatly in the garage. Notes, ideas, contracts, printed drafts, months of effort. I sat in the driver's seat and cried, quietly, for maybe 10 minutes. The garage door was down. No one saw me. Apparently, in their version, that made me unstable. Then there was Trinell's addition. The girls had nightmares, she wrote. They didn't feel safe when she was around. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I took a breath, picked up my coffee, and logged back into my work portal like nothing had happened. That night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, opened my laptop, and scrolled through my old therapy records. I'd asked for copies the previous year, back when I thought I might try switching providers. I found them all, PDFs downloaded and archived. Not one mentioned any history of instability. There were notes about fatigue, stress, being overworked. One session from the middle of the pandemic read, "Client shows signs of burnout from work-family tension. No indication of delusional thinking or mood dysregulation." I printed it, all of it. I wasn't going to argue with their narrative. I was going to dismantle it. The courthouse was closed that weekend, so I took a detour that Sunday and stopped by St. Matthew's, a small brick church that still smelled like hymnals and old wood polish. I didn't plan to sit through service. I just wanted the quiet, the kind of stillness you can only get in a building where people ask the sky for help. I walked through the side door and slid into the back row. Charlene was already there. She was alone, her purse beside her, her hands clasped as if praying, but her eyes were open and unfocused, like she wasn't sure who she was talking to. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She knew I was there. Mothers always know. For a few minutes, we sat in silence. A fan buzzed softly near the organ. Outside, a bird chirped like it hadn't gotten the memo about the tension inside. Then, without turning to me, she whispered, "I didn't think it would go this far." I didn't respond. She continued, "You always pushed too hard. You never let me protect you the way I knew how." I wanted to ask, protect me from what? Owning my own house? Being seen? But I didn't. I let her speak. "You've always made things harder than they had to be," she said, softer now. "Delmar, he's not built for struggle. He's fragile, even if he doesn't show it." That word, fragile, hung in the air like a smoke alarm no one bothered to shut off. And me? I wasn't fragile, so I didn't deserve protection? Or maybe it was easier for them to assume I could carry the weight, so they kept stacking it on. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for her hand like a daughter desperate for reconciliation. But I didn't leave either. Because sometimes the deepest form of strength isn't walking away. It's choosing not to run when every part of you wants to disappear. She never apologized. She never admitted anything. But the way her voice cracked on the last line, "I just didn't want to lose both of you," told me more than I expected. For the first time, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman who'd built her whole identity around managing perception. And I was the part she couldn't control. That made me dangerous. That made me wrong. That made me free. I left the church that day with a strange calm. It wasn't peace. Not quite. more like the awareness that a storm had passed, and I was still standing, wet, windblown, but intact. I didn't rush home. I didn't call anyone. I drove the long way, past familiar streets and corner stores that no longer whispered reminders of who I used to be. That night, as I made tea in the tiny kitchenette of my rented apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. The text was short. "You'll want to see this." Beneath it, a video file. I hesitated before hitting play. It opened on a shaky clip from someone's backyard. Delmar's voice unmistakable over the hum of music and beer-fueled laughter. "I mean, come on," he slurred. "Y'all know that house was never really mine. It's my sister's. But Mom said we'd handle it. You know, legally." There were a few chuckles off camera. Delmar kept going. "She didn't even fight it at first. That's the thing, she just handed it over. Who does that?" Then someone else piped up. "She sounds like a fool." Delmar raised his red plastic cup. "A quiet fool, but still a fool." That word, fool, sat in my chest like a rock. I didn't replay the clip. I didn't need to. The words were already etched into memory. Apparently, one of Delmar's friends had shared it in a private group, trying to be funny. But by morning, it had spread. Local Facebook pages, church group chats, even someone from my high school messaged me, "Is this real?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. By noon, the video had over 20,000 views. There was no context needed. He said it. Clearly, repeatedly. And no one cut him off. No one in the background said, "That's not true." They just laughed. Comments poured in. She always struck me as the responsible one. I remember her mowing that lawn in 110-degree heat while Delmar sat in the garage drinking. I always wondered how he got that house. I didn't post anything. I didn't even like or share the video. I let it live its own life, an accidental truth finally unleashed. The court date was already on the calendar. 2 days later, I walked into that courtroom with nothing new in my hands. No new documents, no rebuttals, just presence. Delmar was already seated, suit wrinkled, face pale. Charlene didn't meet my eyes. Trinell was absent. Devereaux looked tired. The judge asked if either side had new evidence. I simply said, "The court may have already seen it circulating." She blinked. "Are you referring to the video currently under public circulation?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you confirm the voice in the video belongs to Mr. Delmar?" "Yes." The judge turned to Devereaux. "Does your client deny making the statements?" He hesitated. "No, Your Honor." The air shifted again, sharper this time, like a final thread had snapped. The judge leaned back. "Then we'll consider the statements in context with the existing evidence, unless the defense has further explanation." Silence. Charlene folded her hands in her lap. Delmar stared straight ahead. The hearing ended quietly. No shouting, no grand reveal. Just the sound of gavel wood tapping once against the bench. Deliberation would take place within the week. Outside on the courthouse steps, a reporter hovered near the exit. I walked past them. I didn't need to be quoted. I'd been invisible long enough to know how to leave a room without a sound. Later that evening, as the sun tucked itself behind the horizon and the cicadas started their nightly chorus, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and nothing left to prove. I'd said nothing in court. I hadn't shouted or accused. I hadn't needed to. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers. And when it does, it's enough to crumble even the loudest lie. 2 weeks had passed since the clip went viral. 2 weeks since the courtroom fell silent, not because I yelled, but because they'd exposed themselves, on tape, in front of the whole town, and most unforgivably, in front of me. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I just lived. On that particular Saturday, I was making coffee. It was just past 10. The light from the small kitchen window painted long shadows across the tile floor of my apartment. I was scrolling through work emails when I heard the knock. Not hurried, not frantic, just hesitant. I paused. No one ever knocked on my door. I didn't host people. I barely answered unknown calls. I walked slowly to the peephole, and there they were. Charlene, standing in a pressed floral blouse she probably hadn't worn since Easter, holding a slim manila folder close to her chest, like it might keep her from collapsing. Behind her, Delmar looked like a man who'd forgotten how to stand up straight. His hair was unkempt. He held Lily, asleep in his arms, with the kind of grip you see on men who've lost too many things already. I opened the door halfway. Charlene cleared her throat. "We just need a little help. It's temporary, until we get back on our feet. No greeting, no apology. Straight to the ask." I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the two of them, one person who raised me, another who replaced me, and I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. "May we come in?" she added, voice lower now. I stepped out onto the threshold, gently pulling the door so it blocked half my body. It was subtle, but the message was clear. "Help with what?" I asked. Delmar didn't speak. Charlene tried. "The house is in dispute. Your father's pension fund is frozen pending legal review. And Delmar..." She looked back at him. "He's on unpaid leave." I nodded slowly. "So, what exactly are you asking for?" "A place to stay, just for a while. A month, maybe 2. I looked around. Not at them, but at my surroundings. The rust-colored bricks of the apartment complex, the creaking mailbox by the gate, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking 2 doors down. "Why here?" Charlene blinked. "Because you're the only one who still has something." There it was. Not because we trust you, not because we're sorry, just, you still have something. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said calmly, "if that's what you're afraid of." Charlene started to speak, but I cut her off with a small hand gesture. Not aggressive, just decisive. "But I also don't owe you refuge." Delmar shifted Lily in his arms. She stirred, whimpered softly, then fell quiet again. I looked at the little girl for a long moment. She didn't choose this. None of the kids did. I turned back to Charlene. "You told people I was unstable, that I wasn't safe to be around children. But now you're here, with a child in tow, asking for help." She had the decency to lower her eyes. I continued, "Do you see how that makes you look?" Charlene nodded slowly. I stepped back and said, "No." That was it. No drawn-out monologue, no grand declarations, just one word. I closed the door, gently, not in anger, but in clarity. Inside, I stood for a second with my hand still on the knob. I didn't shake. I didn't weep. I didn't gloat. I exhaled. Then I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself the rest of the coffee, and opened my laptop. I had emails to answer. The afternoon passed without drama. I watered my plants, folded laundry, listened to a podcast. There was no applause, no invisible crowd cheering. But I moved through my day with something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet dignity. Later that evening, I received a message from my attorney. He'd drawn up a full motion to press charges for fraud and request damages. He included a projected outcome if I pursued full restitution, liquidation of all assets, possible liens, and a formal investigation into the forged signature. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Don't file it." 5 minutes later, he replied, "Are you sure?" I was. "Winning doesn't mean becoming them," I typed. I shut the laptop and opened the window. The breeze carried in a faint scent of cut grass from the maintenance crew that came every Saturday. I poured a glass of iced tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the fading sun. There was no victory banner, just peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. I was choosing myself. Fall had crept in quietly. The morning air was cooler now, the kind that made you keep the windows down, but the heater on low. I waited until late afternoon, when the sun began to slide behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk leading up to the house I once called home. It was mine again. The paperwork had gone through without much fanfare. No one from the other side contested the final decision. Maybe they were too tired. Maybe they finally understood they had nothing left to pull. The house had returned to its rightful owner, but I wasn't there to stay. I parked by the curb and sat in the car for a few minutes, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered. The trees taller, the mailbox rusted. Time had moved, even when some people hadn't. I walked up the path slowly, key in hand. I hadn't used it in nearly a year. The door opened easier than I expected. The inside was stripped of personality. No toys scattered. No voices. No smell of cornbread or cheap air freshener. Just the echo of footsteps on wood floors, and the faint hum of the refrigerator still ticking in the background. I wasn't there to reclaim anything. I came for closure. I moved through the rooms deliberately. The living room still had the small scuff mark on the wall from where I once tried to hang a mirror that was too heavy. The second bedroom, the one I was eventually given before I was pushed out, still had a tiny crack in the corner of the ceiling from a roof leak no one fixed. In the kitchen, I found a half-empty drawer filled with mismatched silverware. Behind the microwave, still stuck with yellowed tape, was one of Charlene's old recipe cards. Her handwriting was smaller now than I remembered. Neater. She always prided herself on being proper. I took nothing. Not the chipped mug that used to be mine. Not the stained oven mitt that somehow made it through 3 sets of tenants. Not even the framed photo of all of us at the 4th of July cookout the year before it all unraveled. I came for one box. The one they'd boxed up and shoved into a back closet when they'd moved me out, temporarily. Inside were 3 books I'd forgotten I owned, an old planner still marked with sticky notes, and a broken lamp I never got around to fixing. I carried the box to the kitchen counter and set it down. Then I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a final blow. It was just the truth. I laid the paper flat on the counter. I didn't seal it. I didn't sign it. There was no need. It read, I didn't win. I didn't lose. I endured. This house was mine when no one believed I deserved one. I won't return. But I will never erase myself again. I didn't look around one more time. I didn't linger in the doorway for some imagined swell of emotion. I didn't expect violins or epiphanies. I just walked out. As I reached my car, I looked up at the roofline, that familiar overhang I once painted by hand in 100-degree heat. I remembered how proud I was when it dried smooth and clean, how I used to stand back and admire the small things I did for myself. That feeling didn't rush back, but something like it flickered. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, passing landmarks that once held weight. The church where Charlene whispered her half-confession. The mailbox where I left that sticky note. The laundromat where I spent too many nights sleeping upright. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't nostalgic either. Some places are just markers. Proof that you survived walking through them. I stopped at a red light near the highway on-ramp, leaned back in the seat, and whispered, "That chapter's closed." The light turned green. I didn't speed up. I drove steady. Back home, I slid the box onto the floor by the hallway closet and went to wash my hands. The sun had set completely now. The kitchen felt cool and quiet. I opened the window, letting in the air without hesitation. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of something I built. This wasn't about property. It never was. It was about finally being able to say, out loud and without fear, I was here.